Okay, so John Nash was a bit of a wackadoo, if you didn't figure that out, from either watching the movie or watching that video. A lot of the great economists have earlier was the guy that came up with the relationship between inflation and prices, or kind of explored that. He was running around naked on Yale's campus at some point after he lost all of his friends and family's money in the stock market crash in 1929. So there's been a few stories of some people who have gone off the deep end in academia. So let's see how your knowledge of game theory is progressing here. Let's do another game. So suppose we got, can you hear me all right, Jesse? Let's see, do I got your speakers on? Give me a yes. Okay, I think I heard you. Okay, good. And then Skylar, in theory, taught us how to get a video going. So I may be experimenting with that here in a little bit too. All right, so one thing at a time. Let's see, am I on your screen? Looks like right about here. Okay, so let's say we've got two people, Pat and Chris, and they are trying to decide whether they should go to the ballet, which is a hot ticket in town. They're in town this weekend. So there's a Russian ballet guy that's hot to trot in the ballet world. Or we've got the fights, where it's the ultimate fighting challenge 161, and it's the greatest two heavyweights of all time. So we got two events in town. Pat and Chris are in love with each other. And, well, that's for you to decide, I guess. So we've got our choices of the ballet or the fights, and we've got a young couple madly in love with each other. And I tried to keep this, gender and sexual preference neutral here. So you guys in your own mind can decide on which way they roll. So if they go to the ballet together, Pat gets 2 units of satisfaction and Chris gets 3. If they go to the fights together, Pat gets 3 units of satisfaction and Chris gets 2. Each get 0 units of satisfaction. And if Pat goes to the fights and Chris goes to the ballet, they each get 1 unit of satisfaction. Just that 2 units of satisfaction is better than 1 unit of satisfaction. So we're measuring happiness, or what economists call utility. So you can think of it as the benefit that they get.
Cookies?
And so it doesn't matter. It could be cookies, it could be beer, it could be champagne. So it's a unit of satisfaction. So economists have been able to measure happiness for quite a while. And the catch is that everybody's measure of happiness is different. So I could pin you down and say, hey, how much satisfaction on a scale of 0 to 100 do you get from a mug of beer after a long night of managerial economics? And you tell me 10. And I say, well, Ryan, what does 2 mugs of beer give you in terms of satisfaction, total satisfaction, relative to 10? 20? And Ryan, what does 3 units of satisfaction, or 3 units of beer, give you in terms of satisfaction? 15. So 15, your total went down, or did it go up by, instead of going 10, get into the hangover thing already at 3?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the point is that an individual is able to give a preference ranking of 2 beers is preferred to 1 beer. If we kind of press things, we could get into the incremental value of each beer. In other words, it's possible for people to scale their preferences on the quantities of stuff that they purchase. But what's not fair is to compare those things across people. So there is some legitimacy to having numbers like this, as long as we're comparing them within each person. For Chris, since Chris is the person up here, the second entry is Chris, these numbers have real meaning. Of 2 units of satisfaction is greater than 1, 3 is greater than 0, 0 is less than 2, right? So there's an ordinal rank to the preferences. Not necessarily a cardinal rank, where if you have a measurement and you say 12 inches and 2 inches and 3 inches means something across everybody, but it does mean something to Chris to have these numbers associated to their preferences. All right, that was a bit more of an aside, but since you brought it up, that's what these preference rankings and numbers mean. So your job is to predict where these people are going to go. First step when you look at new games is to look for dominant strategy. Is there a dominant strategy for either Pat or Chris? How did we check a dominant strategy for Chris? What's the key thing? How do you start off? Yes, that's kind of ultimately that there's a choice that's better regardless of what the other person does. So to test that, we use that little if statement, kind of an if-then analysis. If Pat goes to the ballet, Chris should go to ballet because 3 is greater than 0. If Pat goes to the fights, Chris should go to the fights because 2 is greater than 1. So does Chris have a dominant strategy? No, because depending on what the other person does, they're going to do something different. What about for Pat? If Chris goes to the ballet, what's Pat going to do? Ballet, because 2 is greater than 1. If Chris goes to the fights, what's Pat going to do? Go to the fights, right? Because 3 is greater than 0. So, does Pat have a dominant strategy? No. Neither player has a dominant strategy. Strike 1, strike 2. That's a good way to start, but neither player had it there. So, what do you want to do next? Was a solution set such that you wouldn't want to change, taking as given what the other person's doing. So let's go to this solution, 0, 0. Would Pat like to change? Yes. So forget it. As soon as somebody wants to change, then you're done. So would Pat want to change from here? No, just the opposite logic of what we just did. 3 is greater than 0. Would Chris like to change? No. Bingo. Right? So neither player wants to change their strategy, taken as given what the other one's doing. So that's a Nash equilibrium. Are we done?
There could be more, right?
There can be more. Yeah, so that's the one thing about Nash equilibrium. There could be more. If there's more, here's a little secret. They're always going to be on the diagonal because of the way it works with checking out the logic. So that's one little kind of key tip here. Multiple Nash will always be on the diagonal. So if there's another Nash, it has to be here. Is it? Would Pat like to switch? No, 2 is greater than 1. Would Chris like to switch? No, 3 is greater than 0. So boom, we got a Nash equilibrium. So Where are we going? Ballet or fights?
Depends on who owes more to the other person.
Depends on what?
Who owes more to the other person.
Who owes more to the other person, okay? So we start bringing in some non-monetary benefits, maybe. How much do the tickets cost? That's a good one. Now, in order to adjust for that, we'd have to say that these are benefits per dollar, because that would be, if one was $1,000, then it would be like, oh, that's no brainer, we're going to this one. So we'd have to assume that these are benefits per dollar, that we've kind of taken that into account. Okay, so that's a good one. What else? How does this young couple, madly in love with each other, determine where to go? Now, does it make a difference if we repeat this game? If we play it 10 times or something? So first of all, cooperative or non-cooperative? Young couple, madly in love with each other. And so if we're playing it 10 times, of this cooperative game, possibly. Bounce back and forth, we come up with some degree of fairness, right, between each other. So we alternate. You get to choose, then I get to choose next week, and that's how we work it out. So what if it's a one shot, though? That's kind of where, you know, it's this Saturday, Russian Ballet's in town for one night only, Ultimate Fights are in town for one night only, this is it. What's another fair way that this couple could resolve their battle? Okay, that's up here. So what does it say about that? I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. That's up here, right? Who likes the fights and who likes the ballet? Is that revealed here?
Yeah.
Who likes what?
Chris likes the fly. Chris likes the
Chris.
Pat.
I don't see a lot of confidence here, Ryan.
Chris likes the ballet.
Pat likes the ballet.
No, Chris likes the ballet.
Chris likes the ballet.
Yeah.
Chris likes the ballet.
And Pat likes the fights, right? So if they go to opposite events, then they are getting more satisfaction than if they actually go to the thing they don't like, right? So yes, we've got some of their preferences revealed here on who likes what. All right, I don't know if that helped us out at all, but
Could you say that again just to make sure? Chris likes the
so if they both go to independent events, which is Pat to the fights, Chris to the ballet, they each get a little bit of satisfaction as opposed to flip-flopping, vice versa. Right? So Pat is our fight liker, and Chris is our ballet liker. Okay? All right. Which is why there's 2 instead of 3 here, depending on which one they choose. So, what would be one-shot game? What's another way that might be decided? Jesse, what are your thoughts here? What happens to the Overland Park couple in this type of battle?
I'm just going to take a stab and pick the 3 and 2. They would go to a fight.
So who wins who's kind of wins or who's better off if they go to
Pat.
fights together? Pat. Okay?
Yeah.
That's not happening. Skylar says that's not happening.
2. Right? 3's not that bad.
So one shot, what would be a possible fair way to resolve it? You guys might have used this method. Flip a coin. Right? Flip a coin. So let Lady Luck determine where we're going. We flip a coin, 50-50, and heads we go to the ballet, tails we go to the fights, right? So for each solution, there's also what we call a mixed strategy solution, where you will randomize your play among the two choices. So that is one of the equilibrium outcomes too. So we've got two Nash equilibrium. So that is at least helpful to say that our prediction from the economist point of view is they're going to do something together in a cooperative setting. It's either going to be this or this. And then we might be able to further say that there's a mixed strategy equilibrium of flipping a coin. Now I use flipping a coin just because we all can relate to that. But what we're really doing is we're choosing a randomization tool that yields a 50-50 outcome. So I'm going to roll a die. If it's 1 through 3, we go to the ballet. If it's 4 through 6, we go to the fights. Same thing. So we leave it to Lady Luck, a mixed strategy equilibrium. Now, the next material we're going to look at is bargaining. And that brings up some other options that you started to hint on, like maybe there's some other factors we can do when we start to bargain. And so we'll talk about that later. I'll just kind of maybe leave that on the table dangling here, that you can imagine each couple kind of making one choice better than the other through changing the payoffs, or making the alternatives seem different, right? That's part of the negotiation process of how much of our cards we reveal and how much we don't. So that is in the bargaining section that we'll talk a little bit more about later. All right, so since we're having so much fun, this game, by the way, is a classic game that was in an economics journal called Battle of the Sexes. Now, in that version, it was definitely a male wanting to go to the fights and a female wanted to go to the ballet. But this was like in the 1960s or something when it was written, 60s or 70s, I'm not sure. So, Battle of the Sexes. The first game we looked at was called Prisoner's Dilemma. And this one is Battle of the Sexes. Okay. Do one more here. So in this one, let's play a game here. The game rules. So this is a game I used to play in 7th grade in the lunchroom. You guys might relate to this one. I can't remember what we even called it, but you took 2 coins, and each player, keeping it to themselves, put a head or a tail on. Now, who's got 2 coins? I need a little bit of props. Oh wait, I thought I had some coins in here. I do have some. It's hidden in a separate little pocket here. All right, so how this would work is each player takes a coin and chooses head or and if the coins match, player 1 wins. If they don't match, player 2 wins. Okay? Got the concept? And then
Say it again.
So I'll write it out. Yes. This was a little bit before video games. Pac-Man might have been around, or Asteroids, but maybe not a ton. So, all right. So you got two players with 2 quarters, let's say. We usually played with quarters. Number 2, each player chooses head or tail without the other's knowledge, without the other person seeing it. On the count of 3, coins are revealed. If the coins match, then player 1 wins. If the coins don't match, so one's a head, one's a tail, then player 2 wins. All right, so figure it out. Put this into a game form, and the person with the correct answer gets an extra credit point, or 2. Put this into a game, into a payoff matrix form, so that we can make some predictions. Everybody who gets it right, so work on your own, everybody who gets it right gets an extra credit point. Do I have you kind of on split screens, Jesse? That's what I thought. It looks. I could probably shift that a little bit that way, just.
It's okay.
Okay.
I can switch.
Okay. She had like the second half on a different screen.
Dr. McCullough, you know, on that Freakonomics show,
Yeah.
that I think it's Dr. Levitt. He
Yep.
wrote that book.
Right.
He was trying to explain game theory on one of those podcasts, and he got so frustrated he couldn't do it. It was hilarious.
He was trying to do what with it?
He was trying to explain it, and he couldn't do it, and they changed him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really funny.
Ha.
I'll have to put it on the blackboard if anyone wants to listen to it.
Yeah, actually, I would like to do that. I've talked to Steve Levitt and emailed with him a little bit when I was picking out the. I used his book for the intermediate class.
I didn't even know it was economics because my husband had read the book and I've been listening to those podcasts.
Really?
That's how ignorant I was. I didn't know it was economics.
Well, since you're the one that introduced me to that, by the way, I'm going to give you a. I think I've got one or the other, but I'll give you one of them, a Super Freakonomics book that I got from him from a deal that in fact, I'll probably tell the story here after you guys do the stuff, but I want to give you a book that, one of the Super Freakonomics books.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, well, I like that you brought up that podcast thing. I had never heard of that. That seems pretty cool, and I listened to it the other day.
Yeah, I listened to it.
All right, let me see what you got.
I think this is right, unless I have my things mixed up.
That is wrong.
Dang it.
Who else is done? Skylar? Wrong.
Really?
Wrong. Wrong. You're not done.
Did the other Jesse get it right?
The other Jesse's not quite done yet.
All right.
Wrong.
You can go without me.
Go ahead. I want to give everybody. And what else did I see out there? Heads and tails. Okay, so all of those were wrong. So think about what goes on. When you win, what do you win? 25 cents. Okay, so you win a quarter. It's important though, I saw a lot of ones and zeros. What do you lose? 25 cents. So set off your payoff matrices that way, where the winner gets not 50 cents because they already had 25 before, right? The win is actually 25 cents. The loss is 25 cents. Now this one's going to play on Ryan's comment earlier on zero-sum game. What one person wins is what the other person loses, is what a zero-sum game is. So that's what this game is set up as. So I think most of you had the heads and tails thing, right? You were close. All right, so we've got player 1, player 2, a head or a tail, a head or a tail. Player 1 wins when the coins match. So if it's 2 heads, player 1 gets the 25, player 2 loses 25. If they're both tails, player 1 still wins, so it's 25 and minus 25. If they don't, it's just the opposite. So there's your payoff matrix. Now, are you able to see that? There we go. Okay.
Rock, yeah, I just didn't use -25, I used 0 instead. Yeah, I used 0 and 1. 0 and 1.
Right. Which is wrong.
But I had the key to it, the legend. I had the legend down here, you didn't see that.
Ah, you had a legend. Well, if I would have saw the legend,
Yeah,
then
legend 1 means 25.
that quick little penciling that you're doing down there. A legend would work. I got to admit, you're the first student that I've ever heard come up with a legend thing. That's pretty good. So, help me out. What's the equilibrium here? Dominant strategy?
There is no strategy. I don't see how it could be a strategy. It's all luck.
Okay. So, is there a dominant strategy?
No.
No. So, how do we check that? If player 2 plays heads, what should player 1 play? Heads. And if player 2 plays tails, they should play tails. All right? And we could go through that same logic. So, no dominant strategy. Nash equilibrium. Would, if we start here, would player 1 like to switch? No. Would player 2 like to switch? Yes, because -25 is less than 25. So not a Nash. All right, well, we know player 2 wouldn't want to switch. Would player 1 like to switch? Yes, so not a Nash. Same thing if we work around. So there's no Nash equilibrium is kind of the unique feature here. So it is possible to create a game with no Nash equilibrium. So it does seem kind of up to luck, but let me change the game around and say we're going to play this one 100 times. does that change at all your answer of if there's some good strategies or bad strategies to play, knowing that you're going to play 100 times? Were you holding something up, Jesse? I didn't see. Okay. All right, Jesse, come on up here. Not obviously Jesse S here. Gonna start doing a little experiment here, live classroom experiment. So you got a quarter, I got a quarter, and we're gonna play 100 times potentially. I don't know if we'll need to do that, but I've got a strategy in mind. Okay, so you play however you want to play. We're gonna play multiple times. All right. Okay. So you got the rules down, right? So.
Okay, who's player one and who's player
Hold on, we'll get to that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. What do you got? I got a heads, he's got a tail. Looks like player 2 wins. I'm player 2. All right. So let's play again. That was just one time. So let's see. I had a head, he had a tail. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Head, head. They match. Jesse wins. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Head, head. Jesse wins again. 1, 2, 3, go. Head, tail, I win. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I got a head, tail, I win. 1, 2, 3.
there's no flipping.
Head, tail, I win. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Head, tail, I win.
Do head.
1, 2, 3. I got a head, tail, I win again. 1, 2, 3.
He's not flipping it. He's just bringing it back.
1, 2, 3. Head, tail, I win. 1, 2, 3. Head, head, Jesse wins.
Yeah, just leave it there.
1, 2, 3. Head, head, Jesse wins. 1, 2, 3. Head, head, Jesse wins. So you see what my strategy is? What am I doing?
Being consistent.
Playing head every time. Is that a good strategy to play in this
But
game?
that's not the rules.
I get to choose head or tail. What do you mean it's not the
You
rule?
don't have to flip it. It's just.
Didn't say anything about flipping, if that's what you were wondering.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
It's a bad strategy as soon as the other player is on.
All right. And Jesse, now maybe he was flipping, wasn't looking, seeing what I was doing. He didn't have that advantage. But if we played 50 more times and I had head every stinking time, he might start to look over his shoulder a little bit, right? I think Jesse would have figured it out eventually. He was kind of turning the other way and didn't see what I was doing. Texas Hold'em, and they show the cards, and you can kind of see what they're doing. So you guys saw my strategy. All right, so that strategy kind of sucked. Eventually, the other opponent would see what that is and be able to exploit that, as Jesse did. What if I played with a randomization technique? Does that solve it?
Wait. Doesn't solve it. What do you mean?
Does that help things if instead of playing head every time, I use some sort of randomization technique?
Then you can't have any rules of predicting rules.
Okay. So let's pick a die. And my strategy is if it's 2 through 6, I'm going to play head. Or if it's a snake eye, I'm going to play tail. And that's what I do. Every time I randomize. So 5 times out of 6, I'm going to play heads. 1 time I'm going to play tail. Is that a good strategy? Does that help solve things when I play Jesse or any other opponent? Is he going to be able to exploit that potentially?
That time, yeah, 5 more.
the 5-to-1, more times than not, he's going to start seeing head. He might start to say, oh, well, I could play head all the time and maybe take advantage of that, right? So that's an exploitable strategy, potentially. What is the optimal strategy to play? 3-3, or, right, you're right. So what's my percent chance of getting each one? 50%, which is what Jesse was playing, actually. He played the optimal strategy. If McCullough had a brain in his head, he wouldn't have been playing head all. So Jesse's strategy was not a good one, playing with an irrational player who just said, oh, I like heads, I'll just play heads all the time, right? But if both players are rational, which is the assumption that we make in economics, by the way, the rational choice for each player to choose is to play a random strategy of 50-50 each time. So each player should be flipping a coin. Or they wouldn't necessarily have to flip, but on average, change it up. I'm going to play a couple heads, a couple tails. On average, I'm going to play 50% of the time each coin. That is the optimal strategy to play, because any other strategy where you've tilted it towards head or tail leaves it to potentially be exploited by your opponent. Right? So that's the mixed strategy equilibrium. There is a way to mathematically solve the mixed strategy equilibrium dependent upon the pay. I'm not going to go through the math. This is one where I'm going to spare you on. But you look at the expected values, because we're going to spend time on the expected values next week on kind of similar topics. But that is the mixed strategy equilibrium. So the mixed strategy equilibrium is for each player to play heads 50% of the time. In other words, just flip that coin. That is the optimal way to play it. And I do want to put down the concept of what we're doing on how you determine that, is that you set the expected value of each outcome equal to each other. So the key is to set the expected value of each outcome equal to each other. Okay. One more example. Any questions or comments on that? All right. So we've seen one Nash equilibrium, two Nash equilibrium, 0 Nash equilibrium. So we can start to see that they're kind of all across the board here on the various outcomes we can analyze. So suppose there are two firms that are in the mall business. One has an existing mall and is considering expansion, while its competitor is considering entry into the market. So the issue is that the town that they're looking to locate to really can't support 2 malls. There's only one. So the small one there's a big one that's coming in. So here's the setup. We've got North Grand Mall, which is the existing competitor, looking to expand or don't expand. And the other firm, Bucky, this is all on a real world story, by the way. It really is. This was up in Ames. There was an existing mall that was smaller, and there was a guy from Tennessee named Bucky Wolford that was going to bring in a new mall and locate out on the freeway. And so his choice was to enter or don't enter. And here are the payoffs for each outcome. If Bucky entered the market and North Grand expanded, then North Grand is going to lose market share and lose money of, let's just say, 40 million. And Bucky's going to make 40. If North Grand expands and Bucky doesn't enter the market, then Bucky goes on with his existing business in other locations, earning 44 million, while North Grand gets a nice little bump in profits because they're the only show in town with the newly expanded mall. And if North Grand doesn't expand and the new mall comes in, North Grand loses. And Bucky kind of crushes them with an additional 66 or 60 million. And finally, if Bucky stays out and North Grand doesn't expand, then they both go on earning their normal keep, as it were. Okay, so using these numbers, where are we going to go? So dominant strategy, probably the first place to start looking. Does either firm have a dominant strategy?
Yes.
Which one? Your eyeball's starting to get better here. So here's one tip, now that we've gone through a few of these. I could have given you this tip earlier. I didn't purposely hold it back, by the way. You might take the second entry and kind of circle it. If you're in black and white, now I've got the advantage of color, so that you kind of, your brain remembers that the second entry is the person up top. And so if Bucky is choosing enter and that it's there are the payoffs, how does 40 and 44 compare? 60 and 44 compare? Dominant strategy? No. So for North Grand, if North Grand expands, is there a dominant strategy? better regardless of what Bucky does? No. So 30 is better than negative 40, but yet 50 is greater than 44. So that goes either way. And again, you can fall back to the method we did before. If Bucky chooses to enter, what would Northgran do? If Bucky chooses to not enter, what would they want to do? So their choices, there's no dominant strategy. Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium. So with Nash equilibrium, start anywhere. I don't care where. Skylar, tell me when to stop. Stop right here. So would Northgran like to change? No. 50 is greater than 44. Would Bucky like to change? No. 44 is greater than 40. We got ourselves a Nash equilibrium. If there's multiple Nash equilibrium, they are on the diagonal. So would Northgran like to switch? No, because negative 30 is better than negative 40. Would Bucky like to switch? No. 60 is greater than 44. We got another Nash equilibrium. Okay, so to characterize this one a little bit differently, we can start to touch on our chapter 16 stuff with bargaining. So there's a lot of maneuvers that can be done, especially maybe in mall development, of trying to get a certain outcome. So I want to first of all think about this as a sequential game instead of a one-shot game. So if this is sequential, with Northgran choosing first, where do we end up? At the top right. Now, how did you get that? You got to be careful when you do that, but you're right. But I'm just saying, be careful. It doesn't. It was a Nash equilibrium, so that's helpful too. So a technique that we can use to help solve, especially sequential games, is to put this into a different form. So this is called the strategic form of a game, and we can look at the extensive form. So the extensive or game tree form is sometimes helpful to look at. So if Northgran is choosing first, we're going to set this up like this. Here's Northgran, and they're going to choose to either expand or don't expand. And then that's going to bring us to Bucky's choice at this level. And then Bucky has a choice of entering or don't enter for both cases. Enter and don't enter. And then at the end of the tree is the 4 possible outcomes. So here, expand and enter is this payoff strategy of negative 40 and 40. Expand, don't enter is this one. So 50 and 44. Don't enter, or don't expand, don't enter is 44, 44. then finally negative 30 and 60. And so we got the same information that we did here, just presented in a different format. And this is especially useful when we start to think about a sequential game where one player moves first and then another player moves first. Now, back to the question. If North Grand gets to choose first, what is the... Let me get rid of these, don't really need to be here. I added those after first. Skylar, you had us ending here at 50-44. So, why?
I guess because if you enter, then their next move would be to go the other side to their base.
Okay, good. So you're looking to the other player. That's exactly right. So you've got the luxury of seeing what their optimal choice is. And so if we look down here, we can say, okay, if I enter, what is Bucky going to do? Well, Bucky's going to choose this one because that's the best for him, right? Now, if I had chose, so we can put a little check mark by that, if North Grand would not enter, then what's Bucky going to do? Going to enter. So in other words, what we've really done is we've narrowed it down to these two payoffs because we know what our opponent's going to choose. And so now my real choice at hand is not chasing something else. And this is where, by the way, the payoffs could have been greater on one of the other ones that you got to be careful. We really only want to look at these two payoffs. And so the real question is, I'm North Grand. I'm either going to get 50 or negative 30. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. We're going to end up here. And so this is our solution. So you use what's called backwards induction. Use backwards induction. Start from the solutions and work your way backwards on what your optimal choice is. Is that one all right, Jesse?
Yeah.
Okay, now keep the audio on. What if we let Bucky go first? How does that change things if now we let Bucky go first? Do we end up at the same solution? Now this is a little bit more difficult the way we got. You might need to go back to this one or set up a new game tree if you want. Or you could redo the game tree and kind of use some different colors or kind of cross off.
Because if Bucky went first, they would probably choose the one that's in the lower left-hand corner.
Okay. So if Bucky got to go first, so Bucky's got the choice of going here or here. If I go here, what is North Grand going to choose? Not expand. If I go here, what is North Grand going to choose? To expand. So now my relevant payoffs for Bucky now is 44 versus 60, and now we've changed things. Right? We're going to end up at this solution value if Bucky gets the upper hand and gets to go first. So this game, the way it's set up with two Nash equilibrium like this, is called the game of chicken. Remember the game of chicken? Anybody played chicken for real? I have, but I didn't get close enough to really be playing the game of chicken. Justin, you sounded like you were affirmatively saying, heck yeah, I've played that. Were you the chicken or not? Okay.
I was usually the lawyer, so whatever I was writing or on was
Oh, okay. So you were playing it with bicycles, not cars.
Well, no, not real. Well, go-karts.
Oh, go-karts. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Never a
So,
real car, no.
so game of chicken. Two people are heading straight on. Maybe you've seen it in the movies, right? And it's whoever swerves last, right? Is kind of the winner. They're the chicken, right? Of course, if they both choose to be tough guys, they both go boom. And so the payoffs aren't very nice on that one. So we both swerve. I swerve once. The other swerves once. Kind of gives us our 4 payoffs. And so this is the game of chicken of who's going to get to go first. Who moves first?
What's that? What do you determine that who goes first?
Well, that's part of the question here. So there might be circumstances that determine who gets to go first. Maybe the government has stepped in and said, "Well, we will." There was that type of story going on here for Bucky, who never ended up putting them all in. By the way, it was kind of weird. I used this example in class for like 7 years. I first came up with it. I'm like, oh yeah, this was new in the paper, like the mall, and it was whether they were going to expand or not. And this thing just drug on. The city of Ames was so difficult to deal with economic growth. And so anyway, Bucky didn't end up doing it. He was already kind of teetering, and then the financial crisis hit, and he was for sure wiped out. In fact, he lost some of his other malls around the country he had developed. So anyway, and then North Grand actually did finally expand within the last 2 years. They finally did their expansion. So back to your question, who determines who's going to go first? That's all part of it. So what do real world businesses do under circumstances like this? What does Bucky do when he comes to a new town and is thinking about this, maybe knowing that this is a game of chicken? What are some things that you do to hopefully gain an advantage? You want to be the first mover or the second mover? You want to be the first mover, right? So now we can start to get into making threats. And are they credible threats or not, right? Well, I've got some dump trucks coming next week or whatever, right? So somehow that gets out in the media, and he's starting, and he's invested this, and he's got JCPenney as an anchor store, and this was real stuff, by the way, JCPenney, and he signed some leases. And so anyway, there's things that you can do to make it sound like you're for sure coming, and you're coming soon. So that might have put North Grand's plans to expand on hold, because if North Grand knows for sure Bucky's coming, then they're not going to expand. So this gets into the bargaining chapter on strategic bargaining. So there's non-strategic and strategic bargaining. Okay, so who gets to go first can be dependent on a number of things, and bargaining kind of speaks to how well you play your cards. So we have what's called the first mover advantage. May make moves to bluff kind of like playing that game of chicken. I'm gonna go, you're gonna go. Ooh, he swerved a little bit. Is he gonna go? All right, so that kind of tees us up for the last material we're going to look at tonight. All right, so here's the setup. Jesse, can you see that okay? All right. So we got labor unions. We can look at the NBA. You know, you guys have seen the wage contracts dragging on, and big labor and big bosses. What was the one here recently that didn't really have a leg to fly on? I don't think was asking Burger King and McDonald's to double their pay over on the East Coast. Did you see some of the news media where they were asking for a living wage and I mean good, honest people that are working hard that might need to seek some other alternatives because it's just not in the cards for, in that competitive environment, for them to get paid double what they're making now. Okay, so you know, tough situation to try to work through. So here's your strategies. Do we bargain hard and really play tough, or do we accommodate? Both bargain hard, no deals made. Both accommodate, they split the gains from trade. If one bargains hard and the other one accommodates, though, then they get the lion's share of the benefits. So here's our setup. Same thing we had before. So here's the key to this bargaining stuff, or one of the keys under this setup is, first of all, you need to recognize where the equilibriums are. So we've got Nash equilibrium. Would labor want to switch? No. Would management want to switch? No. Nash equilibrium. Would management want to switch? No. 50 is greater than 0. Would labor want to switch? No. So by both playing an accommodating strategy, they end up with 100. If they bargain hard and one accommodates, whoever gives in is the one that's going to get the lesser of the share of the amount. So we've got kind of a fixed amount of benefit between the two parties. So the best way to think about that is back to consumer surplus. You remember where we had, sorry, I might be a little off screen for Jesse. Maybe if I do this over here. So consumer surplus was the difference between value and the price they were paying. Good. And for producers, producer surplus was okay. The price that they sell it for basis versus the minimum cost that they needed to get, that marginal cost curve. So we learned that the marginal cost curve was, or is, the supply curve, and the demand curve is the marginal benefit curve. So in our basic supply-demand framework, we have our home base of price and quantity, and we have a consumer surplus area and a producer surplus area. So I like to kind of bring you back to that thought as we start to think about negotiations. So we've kind of come down to a point where, all right, who's going to budge? If we're talking about NFL, since the NFL season just kicked off yesterday, there's $200 million worth of revenue to be split between the players and the owners. So, who's going to get that $200 million is the setup that we've got here once we've gotten to that point. So both stand to gain. So nobody's really going to be in a losing situation, and something's better than nothing. If the NFL goes on strike and all the players go and they have to get scabs like they attempted to do before, they don't make the money that they were going to make, right? And so fans are unhappy, owners are unhappy, players are unhappy, everybody's unhappy in that situation. So both agents tend to gain, or will stand to gain, as long as they get something. That's what this game of chicken's all about. All right. So give this a read. if they move first, what will the other do? So they're both kind of like, oh, I'd like to move first. It was, you know, who's going to be the first mover? And now we start to strategize on how I can make the other person think that I'm going to move first. The key is that the game starts off as a simultaneous game, so nobody is, like you said, who determines who's going to go first? Nobody has. It's kind of who really moves first is going to be kind of the winner potentially, but not knowing whether the other one has already moved first could be an issue. So there's some uncertainty embodied in that. All right. So here's the game tree setup. Management, low offer, generous offer. Where are they going to end up? What are they going to do? Low or high? Low. Okay, so if they go low, the union is going to accept. So we end up going here. If they go generous, the union's going to accept there, and they would rather have 150 rather than 50. These essentially become meaningless, and so this is our solution if they can get the first mover advantage. So, how can the union change things? Yeah, so that's the threat part. Like, if you do that, if you screw us, we are definitely going to strike. You know, how can they make that more compelling, you know? So how well does the union leader have the union members motivated to not be getting a paycheck? You know, my people are going to go. They're ticked off. You've been doing this for so long. You know, whatever negotiation tactics that they're using, right? How can I make myself credible so that the management really believes we're going to strike? Because that's going to lead to a situation under these circumstances where I got nothing to lose, baby. We're striking, you know. And so how well they can pose that threat ends up being the key to the direction it heads. All right, we can make copies of it. This is what we just said. So now we're going to look at the non-strategic view. How many of you have been in wage negotiations? New job? Ryan, you have? Not everybody has at this point. Anybody else besides Ryan, where you sat down with your boss and you said, listen, that's not enough. Or you had the opportunity to maybe. They said, well, here's what we're thinking. We're going to give you this. I have, actually, when I took the Ottawa University job, by the way. So you'll come across that time. Gustavo, you're potentially in a negotiating position with this new venture. He's got a different venture he's thinking of taking on. So you might be in this position. And so Nash's arguments here were very powerful on how do you strengthen your position, how do you weaken your position. So let me go to you two that have done that. You want to share any of the tactics that you had as you were negotiating?
They offered first,
Okay.
but they asked in the interview itself. They said,
Okay.
what are you looking to get ballpark? So I just took, what I needed to live and then added 10, 15 grand on that figure just to get the ball rolling.
that's what you did prior to actually sitting down at the table, because that was like early on in the interview process?
And then when we sat down at the table, they gave me a formal offer, and then we just negotiated from there.
Okay. Jesse, did you hear that?
I heard a little bit of it.
Okay. I'll just give a quick synopsis here. Ryan went into the interview, thought about what economists call your reservation wage, like the absolute minimum that he needed to work for this, and then you tacked on a little bit of benefit, knowing that. So you were kind of savvy to knowing that this was a negotiable thing, I'm guessing. You know, some people, by the way, everything's negotiable, but I mean, some people have the perception that things are more fixed than others. So he tacked on a little bit. He ultimately got back to the table. They made him an offer, and then what'd you do after they gave you that? They did offer about what you were asking at the time.
Pretty close.
So you're already to the plus.
Yeah,
Okay.
just split the difference.
And so what did you do?
I split the difference from what I was wanting versus what they offered.
Okay, then I misunderstood you. I thought they came to you with an initial offer that was your rock bottom plus 15. They met that. That's apparently not what happened.
No.
Okay.
They-
You gave them your rock bottom first on this little application
No,
thing?
I never gave my rock bottom.
Okay.
I just came up with my rock bottom, added 15 grand.
Okay. It was 100 grand, and he added 15 onto it. He added 15 onto it, so he's at 115. What did they come in at?
We'll just say for this example, I came in at 1.5.
Okay, so they came in a low under what you had done there. Okay, and so your response?
I said 110.
110. Okay, and met them in the middle on that. Okay. So they did know this number because you had put that on the original, but they didn't know that you fluffed it up from rock bottom potentially. Okay. So, Ryan, do you want to share anything in particular about your deal? Whatever details, it doesn't have to
There
fit
wasn't
this.
any negotiation. It was like, this is what this is.
Okay. And okay, so you were you didn't make any moves then on what they said, or did you counter back to them at all, or anything, or I need a little bit more, or anything?
No, same experience.
Okay, so I like to give all my undergrads, and you guys have been through the ringer maybe a couple times. You never look better than you did at the time you got the offer. You never look better than at the time you got the offer. So shoot higher early. Don't go in with the thought that, they'll see how good of a worker I am and then I'll get it next year. Don't do that. A lot of people do, because most people are kind of non-confrontational and don't like conflict or whatever. Think about the process that I've been on the employer side plenty of times. You've kind of gone through a process. You think Ryan's dynamite. From the interview, there was probably consensus, unless it's a real small business, that there was a couple other bosses that thought Ryan was good. So after going through that, it sucks to go through the screening process and hiring. So when you get the offer, it's likely that there's a little bit of movement up. Most likely. Not necessarily every time, but likely some movement up. So try to be aggressive. Even if you're in a position where you have been not working for a while and you desperately need to start work next week, try to maintain composure. Don't jump out of your seat while you're doing it. These are all tough things to do. But you never look better than that first day. So try to do that. So there's a surplus that you're dealing with, right? So Ryan doesn't know that they maybe weren't willing to pay 120. Likely not, but maybe. Who knows? When you start playing this, and you didn't reveal. They didn't know how far down to go. So clearly there was surplus on both sides of the equation. So what John Nash said is that that's typically how it goes in the real world. it's not this economist, we know all the games, we know all the outcomes, and we know everything with certainty. In reality, we're just kind of going with the flow and seeing what it is. Now, what was neat is, and you guys will see this when you work some of your problems, is he came up with a way to show that how you can kind of increase your bargaining power by thinking about your alternatives. What determines the contract that you enter into is not so much the deal at hand, but what you could have done, kind of like opportunity cost. What are your alternatives? So when do you look best for your boss to get a raise? When is your boss potentially a little bit shaken and probably willing to give you a raise? When you threaten to leave and you've got another job lined up potentially, right? So, in fact, I did this to Ottawa real slightly. You guys got to play a long-term game. You got to play a long-term game. So I was at that conference, and I wasn't going to do this, but it came into the conversation. Mary Lou brought up Pepperdine University, and I happened to talk to the chair of a department at the conference at Pepperdine. We just kind of started talking, and we explained, that I was in economics and kind of the situation. Turns out Pepperdine's kind of a nonprofit Christian university. Happens to be in Malibu, California. And he said, well, hey, why don't you apply for this job? And I'm like, no, I'm happy where I'm at. Thanks, though. Appreciate it. So, and I was being truthful. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in Malibu, California, honestly. That's just not for me, just for a number of reasons. But anyway, I'd actually prefer Kansas over Malibu, California. But Ottawa administrators don't know that, and there's kind of this little appeal to Malibu, California or Ottawa, Kansas. I don't know. So Mary Lou and I this is on tape, isn't it? I better be careful. So Mary Lou and I are talking. This was literally just this morning at 11 o'clock, and she brought up Pepperdine University, and so I just had to sneak it in. I said, oh, really, Pepperdine? Well, yeah, I talked to the chair. I just kind of explained what you did, and I said, well, they said they were wanting me to apply for their opening position. And, of course, I told them I wasn't interested. So why do I make a passing comment like that? Right? Kind of raises my other opportunities to the bosses. And so when it comes time to well, should we give McCullough a pay raise or not? Oh, it's Pepperdine University. Is getting 0. We better bump him up, right? So it kind of changes things. So alls I did, I didn't even have anything there. Apply anything that I was thinking about it or anything, right? But I gave the impression that I've got other alternatives, which strengthened my bargaining position. All of a sudden, my bargaining position is stronger. So what Nash did is what's at stake. So think about the payoffs to you and the payoffs to your employer. So what do you do when you do an interview process where you have the opportunity to say, well, I'm a real go-getter and I can sell, ice to an Eskimo and yada, 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 right? So I try to puff up the benefits that I will bring to the company. So that's one way to do it. But it's also equally powerful to raise the alternatives that I could be doing. So when you're at that interview next time, usually you'll often get this question, what other options are you exploring at this time? If they start feeling you out, by the way, that's usually a good warm lead that they're interested in you because they want to know what your other options are. Have some other options, tell them, even if you have to kind of stretch things a little bit. Well, there was this college out in California, Malibu or something. You've heard of that place. Give the impression that you've got alternatives that'll strengthen your bargaining position and weaken theirs. All right. The more that benefits that you bring to your employer, the weaker their position gets, right? So if you have some credible things to say, well, listen, I sold $100 million back in 2011. I sold 80 million back in 2010 or whatever. You know, you start strengthening your value there, weakens their bargaining power, right? So again, it's kind of this tug and pull of bargaining. At the end of the day, what Nash said is that the two are going to split the difference. And that is true. You know, he kind of made that assumption with the model that you kind of split the surplus. But man, in all the hundreds of real estate transactions that I've used that to my advantage during negotiations all the time. It seems to be kind of human nature that you say, oh, let's meet in the middle. And it doesn't work out every time, but a lot of times it does. And so payoffs from you'll get more of the surplus back. So it's a matter of playing down things in some cases and talking them up in others. Okay. So it's a estimation of values on where you're at, and so read the context. Think about the alternatives that each person has, and you can see the splits that come about after considering that. Once you work through a couple problems, I think you'll pick up on it. We'll talk about it, of course, next week if you got any questions. All right. So, bonuses. So sometimes you got to be careful when bringing up a principal agent problem here with, if you're the boss and you have salespeople, there might be incentives for them to lower prices to make a deal happen, which might not be in the interest of the owner, but might be in the self-interest of the agent, right? Going across the table from each other because they're negotiating with the buyer. So you can start to think about whose incentives matter and how that'll affect the outcome through negotiations. All right, I'm going to get to a video here. We're going to try wrap up tonight with a I'll leave you guys read through that. I'm going to try to queue up a video. So we think we got it figured out, Jesse. But I'm not sure we do. We'll see. And then I have to figure out how to make this actually work. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Wait a second. I got to... open folder. I kind of hope this works. All right, there it is. And it's a Freakonomics one, Jesse, by the way.
Awesome.
Have you ever wanted to learn another language but just didn't feel you had the time or energy to do so?
Okay, I got to share my screen still on Zoom. Now I got it queued up. Okay, hold on. Share screen. Now, let's see. I got to check this box, right, Skylar?
Yeah.
Okay, continue. And then I'm going to have to pull it up for you guys up here. Let's see. How did I lose? Did I choose the wrong box? Where the heck did that go? There it is. Jesse, do you see the hand? Yeah? Okay. I don't think there's any audio right now. Maybe. Oh, wait.
We're one of those organisations that has daily moved to the demonstration of the backdrops of the markets. But your book sends that ball right back over the net. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So it's funny that when you said, Matthew, that you want to look at two of the controversial topics, we were almost laughing when you said altruism, because not a single, as we've gone around the United States and the UK, not anyone has ever called that controversial. So it's interesting that.
Well, first of all, no one's ever heard of the ultimatum game except for this room.
You see, we were an audience, you could choose between talking about prostitution or altruism, but this is an audience that is just so much more interested in it's so much more interested in goodness than sound. That's the RSA audience.
So, done with this fun part. Let me do the background of the history. So, within economics, there has been a long tradition of viewing human behavior as being primarily motivated by self-interest. And I would say that in the 70s, a set of renegades who I think are quite popular among this crowd, began challenging those ideas and test those ideas. And it's very difficult to test for altruism in the real world, because when barns used to burn